How's it going, everyone? It's Carpo. So I watched this documentary the other day. It was called Atari Game Over. And I figure if you got Netflix, you've probably seen it on there. But it's a pretty interesting look at how Atari, the company, collapsed. And the premise of the show is that there's a rumor that went around. It's kind of an urban legend that they collapsed when they tried to when they put out the crappiest video game ever made, which was E.T. the video game. So this entire documentary was them going to the landfill where the urban legend says that the Atari company dumped millions of these games, and digging and taking core samples at the dump to find out how to try to find 1983 to get to the exact point, to try to dig up these lost games to prove that it wasn't the games that collapsed the company, or just to maybe just show that they existed. Anyway, in the end, I guess it was a pretty interesting documentary, let's just say that. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone if anyone wants to watch it, but anyway, this isn't really about that. But during watching that, when they were showing the video games, showing this nostalgia, it was only nostalgia to me, because this is the world I grew up in. And when they showed kids playing Atari, you know, they were my age. These are kids that were my age playing Atari when I played Atari. And then they'd show, like, they showed a picture of, like, these older guys, like, you know, in their 30s, like, total 70s haircuts, cigarettes, playing Asteroids or whatever. And it was like, you know, that was my life. That was my world. You know, the 70s, the 80s, that was when I was a kid. And those memories will always be there. And that nostalgia develops for each person depending on when they were raised. And we all know that the biggest nostalgia, the most nostalgic things develop between, say, the age of, like 8 and 15 or 16, you know, during that really prime time where you're old enough to start understanding and listening to the music. You're old enough to start, you know, choosing your own clothes and your own styles, and finding out what you really like in life, you know. I mean, if there are any 16-year-olds out there who are watching this, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, because you're still in that point where the nostalgia is still developing. And but even at that age, you'll still have nostalgia from when you were 10 or 12. In fact, when you're a teenager, if you're a teenager right now, if you're, say, 16, 18, you probably have nostalgia from when you were 14 or 15, because it seems so long ago from your perspective. But once you become, say, you're 40, you know, like I am, almost, you look back on nostalgia from all different types of points in your life. For example, I have nostalgia from when I was a teenager, but I also have a nostalgia from this point in my life when I met my wife and we first moved into our first farmhouse and stuff. It's nostalgic memories whenever I see a farmhouse or something, remembering that. But there are different types of nostalgia. There's the cultural nostalgia, and then there's the exposure, you know, like the situation that you grew up in. For example, the nostalgia of a lifestyle choice, or smelling cigarettes or something like that, let's say. Something that's always been around for all the different cultures. Maybe you smell cannabis and it reminds you of a point in your life. And these are things that everyone is exposed to. But then there are personal nostalgias, or rather, personal cultural nostalgias that are only from certain points in time. Such as, I remember when the car first came out. You know, I remember when we had our first television set. I remember when we had our first radio. And, you know, hearing my mom talk about those things, I can only imagine the stories from her parents and their parents. I'm very fascinated with the idea of the, you know, the World's Fair, when they revealed electricity, you know, and you hear these stories, you know, about Westinghouse, you know, battling with, was it Edison, over trying to, you know, the patent rights and who was going to get to use what type of light bulb, and why they used the tungsten filament, and why they use AC and DC power, and how they tried to use DC power for everything, but it would have taken like all these wires. Anyway, looking back, there's people that remember those times when all that craziness was going on, and they look back and they're like, wow, that was quite the time. Us today, I mean, there's no nostalgia before electricity, but Atari for me, Nintendo from a different time. And I wasn't a big gamer or anything, but that show really reminded me of some of those times playing Asteroids with my dad, Donkey Kong. And then once in a while you'll start thinking about something like that, and other things will pop into your head, like it just did when I was thinking about that. Remembering being 12 years old, sitting in my bedroom, playing Zelda on Nintendo, The Legend of Zelda, for days on end, on and off. Actually, now I remember I was listening to NWA, so here I was listening to Eazy-E and NWA, playing Zelda, and so instantly that nostalgia of the video games relates over to the rap. All of it starts to come together, and it's this point in my life. Hell, I even listened to MC Hammer a little later. You name it, I probably listened to it. But these are things that we have to remember, if for no other reason, just because the kids of today are developing their own nostalgias and their own perceptions of what's cool and what's not. For an adult to say, oh, this age of computers is just overwhelming, it's just, it was much simpler when I was a kid. And you think, yeah, but your parents would say the same thing. They'll say, when I was a kid, we just had 2 channels on the TV, but their parents were telling them, hey, when I was a kid, we didn't have any TV. And then their parents were telling them, yeah, well, when I was a kid, we didn't even have electricity. And on and on and on. Well, we didn't even have engines. We had to run our plows with horses still. And it goes back and back and back. But there's a certain point where the Industrial Revolution took off. And this is, I believe, when cultural nostalgia took hold. In other words, before that, people tended to grow up immersed in the same culture, whereas the Industrial Revolution, which is the prime mover for society, when we were able to create metals, you can go back and look at exactly what happened, and I'm fascinated with this whole complex nature of how we came to be. A person may look back and think, aliens must have helped us, or we must have had some kind of higher power or some help, but the reality is we learned how to smelt metals. And once we did that, we learned how to build machines that allowed us to travel, and then we were able to create electricity, which allowed us to build more machines, more time to work. And it's just amazing that that's when the nostalgia started. Electric guitars came out, in the 50s was when they really started, anybody even really started hearing them. And before that, it was just, the same old music. The nostalgia of music was cultural, but it was different. In other words, I guess what I'm saying in a nutshell is things change so damn fast today that it's easy for us, in my generation, to look at the kids of today and say, oh, they have no culture, or oh man, it seems like they're just stuck in this crazy world of computers and digital stuff. But their iPads, their iPhones are going to be their nostalgia. In 20 years, when everybody's walking around with, digital eyepieces, and we can resist it, but it's going to be the norm. As long as society can continue, if the American dollar collapses, something else will take its place. My point being that the people will continue to be innovative and use the technology we have, even if something disastrous happens. We won't go back to the Stone Age because we still have our wisdom. And it's a different wisdom than we've ever had before, because we've, in the past we've been at the mercy of what we have access to. And today we have access to everything we could possibly want as far as, mediums and materials to create things. If you have an idea today and you want to build it, you can build it if you can afford it. Guys like Da Vinci created all these amazing contraptions and machines, but he didn't have anything strong enough to build it out of. Any materials that wouldn't tear or break. And likewise, many people before him probably had some phenomenal ideas, but just knew that it was beyond their reach at that time. And I think today we're having that same type of mental block, because we have everything at our disposal, but it's almost like it's overwhelming, like everything's been invented. I mean, I don't know if you've ever looked back and thought, some of the people that we revere as being these great thinkers and inventors didn't really create anything that phenomenal. It was just revelatory for its time. But you'd think I could create that easy. That's, of course, because we've grown up in a culture where we already know all these inventions. It's a lot easier for our minds to say, oh, I could have done that. In a time when it's new and everything's new, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's easy for us to judge history and say our parents did this or their parents, and many parents, many people have done dumb things. Like, I was looking back at the teddy bear. Where did the teddy bear come from? It was from Teddy Roosevelt when he went out and he was going to shoot this bear. He went bear hunting and he came back to the cabin to get some food, and while he was gone, one of the scouts caught a bear. Or they cornered a bear with the dogs, and he didn't want to have the president miss out, so he tied it to a tree, roped it up, and waited for the president to come back and shoot it. When Roosevelt got there, he couldn't do it, so it became the teddy bear. And just after that, William Taft, he was coming into office, and he tried to do the Billy Possum. He wanted to sway everybody from the possum to the bear to the new Billy Possum, which didn't take off too well. And you see that the teddy bear is still, active today. But the point being there that they changed their perceptions on animals, and that's what that was all about. That we used to think that the animals were the big danger, and now we're trying to bring them back. And I'm actually going to save that for the next video because I wanted to talk about that a little more in depth. So take care, everybody, and namaste.